In this video, I'm going to show you how to do this animation of a building onto a scene where all the separate parts are moving without having to individually animate all of them. It uses my favorite new add-on called animation nodes. So to start this, you can download the Blender file that I put up in the description so we can start on the same file. You'll start with this. What you want to do is go and download the animation node add-on. The link is also in the description. Once you download that, all you need to do is go to Blender Preferences, go to Add-ons, and then Install. Find where you found the add-on, and it should come up once you've come up here as Animation Nodes. You just want to check that so it's enabled. Now once that's enabled, you'll be able to come in here and just recreate this node tree where you want to get object matrix output, connect it to offset matrix, connect that to object controller fall off, connect that to object ID key, and collection info. You can connect that all yourself. You can just pause and then copy what is there. Now, if you have that set up, what you'll want to know about animation nodes is if you press N, go to the sidebar, they have this function called auto execute, and by default it's usually on always, and that's where it just keeps on updating even though you're not doing anything. So if your computer's slowing down, that's one place to look, but for our purposes we do want it on as always, so that way we can see when we do some changes. So that was keep auto execute on. Next thing we want to do is, well, just to let you know what I did to prep this model is I took all these separate parts of these windows and made them into separate objects. And I did that by selecting a few of them back when they were all together. And then if you go into edit mode, select all, and then press P, you can separate by loose part. So anything that they might be next to each other, but if the vertices aren't actually connected, they'll separate as loose parts. But if the vertices are connected out, it does become a little bit tedious when you have to separate out each area into its own object. But you'd have to do that anyway, even if you didn't have animation nodes. So there still is that one tedious part, but that's based off of the model. If you're lucky enough for a model that already has loose parts or is already separated out, then it's pretty good to go, like the Blender file that I have you download to start this off with. So you'll start off with all of these objects separated out in this collection called building. And next thing you'll want to do is select them all and then go to object down at the bottom, set origin to center of mass. Surface or volume, doesn't matter. Now you can see all those dots show that each individual object has their origin point in the center, which is key because we want them all to rotate on their one center point as opposed to rotating from the one point that usually is down at the bottom of the building. So now that we've set the origin to individuals, we want to do a new ID key, which we'll plug into this node. An ID key just holds the transformation input of all the individual objects. So what you want to do, the way you start out, is with just initial transforms and index. And what you want to do is with the building selected, you want to do a new ID key, call it building, and then you can turn off these other two, and then do from current transforms, and then now these are set up with this information of where they're sitting right now, and now it's connected to that ID key. So now that we have that ID key set up, we can add a empty, and this is the empty that we'll use to control which of the objects are moving around. So now we want to update the tree. And we can do that by first adding the ID key, building, adding the collection we want to use, building, connecting the matrices to the matrices, and then selecting our, oh, see something went wrong. My cube went down here. And that happened because I added the empty cube to the building collection. So I want to move that out to the scene collection, bring that back up so I can see it. And now, with this object selected, I can just press this eyedropper to have that selected. And it's not doing anything yet, but the key is the offset matrix. This controls what transformations are going to happen to the entire matrix. So what we want to do is rotate it by 90, and you can already see it's doing something, and we also want to change the scale to 0. So now, as I scale this empty up, it is, let me get that closer. As I scale this empty up, it is bringing each of the individual objects onto the scene. So I can just animate this really quickly, have it start off really big, have it start off with nothing showing, keyframe it here, and then keyframe it again in whatever position I want, and I can control where it's going to animate onto. And a lot quicker than doing it individually. Forgot 2 steps, very important steps. So once you have your empty animated how you like it, so it's moving already, we don't need to, we can change the auto execute from always, because we don't need to have it updated all the time. It's just every time the frame changes now, because as the frame changes, you have the empty moving. So you can change that from always to just frame changed. And that way it doesn't overload your computer. And the next thing we want to do is, very important step with things like this, is bake. You have to bake it by going over to in the sidebar in the animation node window, and then get the overview tab underneath the node tree tab, and then you just need to bake it, and then we'll go through and bake all the frames of the entire animation, so that way it isn't updating the node tree as you're rendering it. So that'll really help. It was crashing for me if I wasn't baking it first. So hopefully that was a helpful tutorial.